Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination.
Welcome to the Travel Podyssey, a travel podcast based on lesser-known destinations. I am your host, Jake Twargoski, and on this show, we will give an overview of the destination and discuss our reactions to them. Each episode will feature a different guest, so get your passports ready, and let's go on a Travel Podyssey. Welcome to the second episode of the Travel Podyssey. In the last episode, I was focusing on the United Kingdom, specifically Wales and Western England. And this time, I found someone who has a lot of travel experience, whether it's on road or air. And that person taught me a lot of destinations I don't know about. A few I want to go back to someday. Before I dig deep into this episode's topic, let's go over what happened in the last episode. This is the Travel Recap, where your memories get refreshed over a review what happened in the previous episode. Welcome to the first ever Travel Recap. Let's go over the first episode. I sat down with Reese to talk over Western England and Wales. We talked over cities like Bath and Oxford and the small towns in Wales. Let's hear some moments from Reese.
Oxford and Bath, some distance between them, but both being western cities in a nation, being so different in terms of their architecture.
Why don't we shift around to the Welsh capital of Cardiff?
Cardiff, a beautiful city. My grandparents on my dad's side are both Welsh, born and raised in the city of Cardiff. My grandmother, who's still alive, God bless her, still speaks Welsh. Every time I see her, she tries to speak a little bit of Welsh to me, and it's a really interesting language. And Cardiff, a very, very interesting and important city in the UK's history. Welsh people were not allowed to speak the Welsh language when my grandmother was growing up.
Wow, that is crazy. Things changed a lot.
I did a paper last year for my Appalachian history class, and it was on the Welsh in Appalachia. And I specifically targeted coal miners in Appalachia, and coal is a huge part of the Welsh economy. The southern coal fields in Wales are very important to not only the Welsh economy, but to the British economy back during the World War II days. Bristol, a beautiful channel city. There is a channel that runs right through Bristol, and so there's a lot of channel-side homes and apartments. It's a very interesting take on a British city. I'm an Arsenal fan, but me and my dad, during my travels, he has told me not to bring or wear a Arsenal jersey just for fear of a football hooligan possibly attacking me or starting an argument over some football antics or shenanigans that might be going on within the Premier League table.
That is pretty funny, but safety always comes first. Card is king.
Cash is not something that is circulated very often anymore. You really only see a pound note during times when you may go to a historical site where they have donation boxes. Outside of that, you really do need a card.
Reese taught us some interesting things about the United Kingdom, and some stuff I didn't know about. The things Reese shared gave me ideas of where I want to travel next in the UK. Along with Reese's ideas, I shared my own experiences to the United Kingdom, including food allergy awareness in restaurants and card being king. And that's it for Wales and Western England. Now, you're probably wondering who I picked to be the guest for this episode. You see, this episode is called the Variety Episode, because me and that guest are talking about different destinations and different types of travel. Having different types of travel gives us experience of how we travel, why we travel, and we can share these experiences to other people. And that's what spices up the variety. And what also spices up variety? The different places we've been to and how they compare to each other, including their similarities and differences. And now it's time for me to introduce today's guest. It's a famous person in the Cutting Edge Studios on WMUL-FM. And that person is the first female guest in the Travel Podyssey. And that is the Murrow Award-winning and the AP Virginia's Award-winning WMUL-FM News Director, Emma Johnson. So Emma, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a nice day outside.
Before we get started into the variety episode, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
My name is Emma Johnson. I'm the news director here at WMUL, And I have a cat named Chi-Chi, and she is an orange menace, I guess is how you could describe her. I woke up this morning and she had everything that was on top of my fridge knocked on the floor.
That's crazy. I haven't had a cat since I was 4 years old.
Oh, it's a long time. I have had a cat just about all years of my life, but I don't know why she likes knocking stuff off my fridge.
I've been having dogs since I was 6 years old. Anyway, I know you've traveled to a lot of places. You like to travel a lot as much as I do. Mm-hmm. And first stop, you have talked about the world's largest teapot up northernmost point of West Virginia.
I know that you want to probably talk about other places that aren't specific to West Virginia, but we do got to talk about the world's largest teapot because that's just kind of funny that you can find that here in West Virginia. And if you've never seen it, it's kind of just like a big teapot that was built in the middle of a field. So it's kind of funny.
That is very funny, and I've heard about it because my mom and brother went down to that part of West Virginia while I was doing a summer program up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I did some research, and that teapot is closer to Erie, Pennsylvania, and geographically Canada than Huntington, where we are in West Virginia.
Yep. And so it attracts visitors from all over because each state kind of has their own thing that they're known for. And you wouldn't expect West Virginia to be known for the world's largest teapot. And yet we have it here. And sometimes I don't even think people in like this area and more southern areas realize that that is here in West Virginia because you'd have to drive a good 4 to 5, maybe even 6 hours depending on where you're at. So
plus, too, we're more by Cincy and Louisville than the world's largest teapot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we got Cincinnati, Columbus, Louisville. You can even make it to Lexington in less time than what you could make it up to the world's largest teapot. So we got quite a few things around us. Very grateful for.
I'm glad, too, because I do love Lexington, Cincinnati, and Louisville. That is Kentucky's Golden Triangle. And speaking of the triangles, you've been to the Lone Star State, Texas, and they're known for the Texas Triangle.
I have. I've been to Texas quite a few times, especially growing up. The place that I probably like the most when visiting is Conroe, Texas. It's a little town/city outside of Houston. And it's where my grandparents lived. And my aunts and my uncles actually lived just a little bit outside of Conroe in a town called Springdale. And so that one's a little bit smaller, but they all kind of lived in the same area. And I really liked going to visit my grandparents because my grandparents actually have the Spanish rodeo in their backyard. And if you've never been to a Spanish rodeo, it's kind of just like a rodeo that we have here. The only difference is they speak Spanish the entire time. Everything is done in Spanish, and it's very influenced by like Spanish and Mexican culture. And it's really fun because you can go like a 2-minute drive down the neighborhood to get into the entrance, or you can sit on their back porch and you can listen to them announce it from their back porch, which is pretty cool.
Never been to a Spanish rodeo, but I did go to a couple rodeos in Florida, which is very similar to Texas. And I think the first rodeo I remember going to was back in 2009, and it's in this place called River Ranch. It's in Central Florida, and I remember seeing a rodeo there on Saturday night, and 5 years later, I participated in Top Hand Rodeo down in the Gulf Coast of Florida in this middle of nowhere called Mayaca City. And if I went to that Spanish rodeo, it'll give me flashbacks back when I was growing up.
It definitely would. Like, it's a lot of fun, and you get to experience the culture that you normally wouldn't get to experience just on your average day and stuff. But they do the rodeo every Thursday down there, like every single Thursday, except when it gets cold. And Conroe is prone to flooding whenever hurricanes come in and stuff. Like, people in Conroe that have their houses built on those like 20-foot stilts and stuff.
Wow.
Because of how much flooding will happen during like hurricane season and stuff. So pretty much the only thing that stops them is the weather, and if anything crazy happens like COVID, if Lord forbid we ever have another pandemic.
Hopefully it wouldn't happen because I had to cancel my trips to London and Nashville because of that. Luckily, I went to London in late 2023. I talked a little about England with Reese in the last episode.
Where have you been in London?
I've spent 7 days in London. I've mainly spent on the main famous attractions, but my favorite museum there is the National Portrait Gallery because it's a lesser-known museum. It's right behind the famous National Gallery. The National Portrait Gallery is a world-class museum with less crowds.
That's pretty cool. Have you ever been to the Smithsonian here?
Yes, I've been to the Smithsonian so long ago. Once again, back in 2009, I remember going to the Museum of American History and the Air and Space Museum. That's back when me and my family took an RV trip from Florida all the way to DC and stayed in Maryland.
I have also made a few RV trips in my lifetime, Jake. They're pretty fun, aren't they?
They are. And I grew up RVing, and the farthest I've been on an RV trip is the capital of Texas, Austin. Enjoyed Austin because Texas-style barbecue, my favorite style of barbecue.
The longest RV trip I've taken was to Houston, Texas. Actually, no, I take that back. I went to San Antonio, Texas with the RV too. My parents, we took a trip down there because my brother was graduating from the Air Force, and that was an insane trip from all the way in Logan County all the way down to San Antonio, Texas. But we had a blast. It was really cool getting to see the airmen graduate. Like, I'd never been to a ceremony or anything like that, and so that was pretty cool. It was also really nice to see my family then because everyone kind of got together to support my brother. And so, like, my grandparents came down and my aunts and my uncles, and then my siblings that live here in West Virginia, they went down with us too. So it was really nice. And San Antonio is really close to the border, and so a lot of things there are also inspired by, like, Mexican culture. And you can kind of, like, walk through different parts of San Antonio, and they have, like, street vendors like you'd see in Mexico. So it's really cool to get to experience that.
Never been to Mexico, but I've been to San Antonio, and the one thing I like to say is most people go there to see the Alamo and the Riverwalk.
Yep.
And there's so much more to San Antonio than the Alamo and the Riverwalk because when I went there, one of my high school teachers, she is from Venezuela, and she told me that San Antonio's known for Mexican food.
Yes, and they have some really good Mexican food there. This might be a biased opinion, but probably some of the best I've ever had. And I love Mexican food. I will always try to find some sort of Mexican food if I can because it's just really good. But San Antonio, if you want like good, authentic Mexican food, that's definitely where to go.
There's this thing called the Tex-Mex cuisine, which is found in both Austin and San Antonio. They're close to each other, about hour and a half if you don't count traffic, right on I-35.
Yeah, traffic on I-35, it can be a pain in the butt. We were driving there for something. I don't even remember what it was because I was young whenever we took this trip. But I was with my grandma and my grandpa, and we sat in traffic for almost 2 hours to get wherever we were going. I think we were going to like some mall or something. Like I said, I don't remember. I was young. But speaking of the traffic, that leads to another point, which is like if you're ever traveling from Houston to Galveston, you at least have to leave like 2 hours in advance because of the traffic too.
That makes me think of Florida traffic because I remember growing up, I used to go to Disney World a lot. And 10 years ago, I remember the traffic on I-4 wasn't that bad, but occasionally gets bad. And now, yeah, I have to sit in traffic for an hour right outside of Orlando.
That is true. I think the last time I went to Disney, which was last year, gosh, we sat in traffic for a good hour or two, not on the way in, but on the way out, because everybody, was trying to leave and stuff. And we waited for as long as we could to leave, to let some of the traffic die down. That still was not enough. But we made it. We got dinner. We made it home. That's all that matters.
That's nice to hear. And while we return to San Antonio, there are 4 other Spanish missions in San Antonio, and they're protected under the National Historical Parks, and all 4 4 of those missions, plus the Alamo, are UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to Waco, Texas?
Never have, but I've heard about it, and as Texas is one of my favorite states, I might have to go there. I've heard it's between Austin and the DFW.
It is. Waco, Texas was actually, like back in the day when it was first created, it was home to a cult. So a lot of things in Waco are kind of like museum-esque to talk about the cult that happened in Waco, Texas. But it's also a really beautiful place in Waco, and Waco I don't think is really talked about that much. And once again, there's just so many like hidden gems to go and see. They have the museums, and they have really good food, and they have some different like memorial type of thing from like the Spanish War and all of that back in the day. And so it's really cool to see that those parts of Waco's heritage are still being honored and stuff. But it's a really cool place, and if you haven't been there, I'd recommend it.
I might have to go there someday, and I have no plans to go to Texas as of this recording in the near future, but I'm going to a place that's similar to Texas, and that is Alberta, which is a western province in Canada.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't realize that some of our Western culture was actually inspired by those areas in like Canada and then all the way down in Mexico too, and we kind of just came together and blended all of those. So little neat part of history.
You're right, because back where I'm from in Florida, you know some Western stuff. Texas, when most people think of Western stuff, and of course you have lots of Western states too, like while I was in California, we have Knott's Berry Farm, which is often overlooked by Disneyland, and there's a lot of Western influence in Knott's Berry Farm.
That place is gorgeous, by the way. It is really gorgeous. I went there when I was young. We went there. And so I don't remember too much because, granted, this was for my mom and her sister, and I was literally like 5 years old, or maybe I was a little older. I think I was like just starting grade school, but I remember that I had a lot of fun on the rides and stuff, and I was always like, I want to go back. I want to do this and that, and I've never gotten to go back since then, so maybe one day.
Yeah, right, maybe one day, because I've been to Knott's more recently, so I have a more vivid memory than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And Knott's, I enjoyed the theming of Knott's, and one of the highlights I'll mention is I was there in mid-May, so they had some type of berry festival. I don't remember which it was, and I was lucky enough to go to Mrs. Knott's chicken dinner when they had the buffet, because they had a more variety of sides, a more variety of dishes.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool, Jake. Sounds like you had a good time. Let's see. I can talk about Galveston if you want to.
Let's go ahead with Galveston, because I haven't heard too much about Galveston other than the 1900 hurricane, which is over a century before us.
Yes, and if you didn't know, that hurricane almost completely wiped Galveston off the map. And if you've ever been there, you will see where some of the older buildings they have actually have like water lines still on them from that, and so they kind of try to honor that. And Galveston is really cool in the aspect that you kind of get like a modern take and a historical take, because obviously a lot of those buildings didn't survive that hurricane and flood that came through, but the ones that did, they've turned into like an old school candy factory where you can watch people pull the taffy and stuff like that, and they'll throw it out to you while it's still warm.
That's very fun. Never heard of this.
They have a really good ice cream shop that make homemade ice cream. The closest thing I can describe it as is like Austin's here. So
I know Austin's.
They kind of have their own little thing there. And then probably one of the coolest things in Galveston is they kind of have like a New Orleans inspired street, like Bourbon Street in New Orleans.
I've been there twice, and I know what Bourbon Street feels like, and there's a Florida equivalent in Tampa called Ybor City.
Yeah, and so Galveston has one I don't want to say very, very similar, but it has the same vibe in a way, like the buildings are kind of built the same and all of that stuff. And then one of the coolest things is that you can like go once you're done doing all of your things in the city part of it or the town part, because it's really not huge, but you can then go to the beach and you essentially just bypass when you pull up and you can stay there for the entire day. I will say, if you're going to Galveston, the water is not going to be crystal clear like it is in Florida, like Destin, the Emerald Coast. It's not going to be like that because Galveston is in the Gulf, and so the water is very brown and murky, but it's not like disgusting, if that makes sense. It's just not clear. So
Right, kind of like the Seine River in Paris, because my part of Florida, the Gulf Coast, they're known for their beaches. I even heard Alabama is known for their beaches too, and I did some research behind it, and the reason why a part Galveston is all not clear because the Mississippi was used for industrial purposes and all the pollution went west instead of east.
Yep. So if you're thinking about going, don't expect anything like Clearwater, Florida, or anything like that. But it is a really good time. It's a really nice time on the beach. And you have to make sure you wear sunscreen. I have never in my life been somebody who like burns super easily in the sun and stuff. But every single time I've been to Galveston, I get sunburnt bad. And it got so bad one year that I had like blisters on my back.
Wow.
But I still had a really good time. I'd always be willing to go back. It's just a lot of fun. I once found a bracelet digging in the sand there, so that was pretty cool.
That's an interesting find because I'm not a beach person, by the way, because I do not like getting sand all over my feet. That's the reason why. And I did face some of the sunburnt. It was not horrible as you, Emma, but it was out in California because the sun there, the ultra rays are stronger out in SoCal.
Mm-hmm. Very much. Like, if you ever plan, I would just like to say, if anybody from this area ever wants to travel to, like, southern Florida or Texas or California or Arizona, wear sunscreen because it is so much, like Jake was saying, the UV rays and stuff are so much stronger in those areas in comparison to, like, here in West Virginia.
And if you're people like me who are from those areas like Florida or anywhere else in the Sunbelt, your body might be used to it. But if you go out west, regardless if you're from Florida or West Virginia, please do wear sunscreen because you may have a risk of getting sunburned.
Yeah, and you know what? It saves you in the long run if you wear sunscreen anyways, because then you don't have to worry about getting sunburned, which is, they've got so many different kinds of sunscreen now that there's something for everyone.
I don't get much sunscreen because I am from a sunny part of the country.
Yeah, I also am guilty of not wearing sunscreen like I probably should, but I also don't get burnt easily, so it's like whatever. The reason why I got burnt that bad in Galveston is I put sunscreen on once and I was like, oh, I'm fine, blah, 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 knowing good and well that I probably should have done a second one because it was a really sunny day. There were no clouds in the sky. It was very hot. It was probably close to 100 degrees the last time that I went. It was the dead of summer, like end part of June, beginning of July, because I stayed for 2 weeks. And so it was very hot. And I will also say, those places, if you have curly hair, you got to make sure to put your products in because if not, then your hair poofs all the way out because of the humidity.
Didn't know that, but I take that back. I did hear about that, and a similar story to me was I was at Disneyland last May, and it was 80 degrees. It wasn't horrible as in Galveston, but there were no clouds in the sky, and it was just pitch clear with the sun out, and most things in Disneyland are outdoors, including the queues.
Yeah, and there's like barely any shade in the queues too. And so you're standing there for, an hour or two waiting on your ride and the sun is just beating down. But I'm very thankful. Every time I've went to Disney, I try to plan it like spring break-esque so it's not super hot, but you still deal with it a little bit.
At least the Disney by me has a lot of indoor stuff because Florida summers, I do not like Florida summers, even as a Florida native, because the heat gets you.
Last time I was in Disney in Florida, John and I were in the Epcot ball riding the ride or whatever, and we got stuck. The ride shut off on us whenever, the part when you're like coming down out of that thing and you're going backwards.
Oh, yes, that's the ending of Spaceship Earth.
Yes. The ride literally stopped on that incline while we were going back, and so we had to just sit there for like 30 minutes until they figured it out. But it was a good place to be stuck, to be honest, because it's cool in there. It was shaded. You were in the sun. Can't complain too much.
You're right, because I've been going to Disney for over 20 years, and Spaceship Earth, Haunted Mansion, People Mover, those rides just stop for about a couple minutes and turn back on, because this is coming from a Disney park veteran. It's usually when someone in a wheelchair or a mobility wheelchair has to get onto the ride and get off. That's probably the reason why.
Oh, no. Like, it actually stopped on us this time, Jake. We didn't even have the opportunity to get into the thing for you to come out of the ride. Half of the train cart was still in that loop, and then the other half was, like, starting on that incline, and it just stopped. And so the workers came out, and they tinkered with some stuff, and then they got us back on the right track, and we just went down the incline, and then we were able to get out. That was kind of funny. But
At least you've got out safely from that.
yeah, it doesn't really bother me to be stuck on rides like that, because when I was in, I want to say 2nd grade, we have this thing called the Apple Butter Festival in Chapmanville, West Virginia, the town next over from where I'm from. And at the Apple Butter Festival, they had this big Ferris wheel one year, and it stopped, and I got stuck at like the very top for 2 hours until they fixed it. And that was kind of like when I was like, it's not too bad being stuck on a ride that's not doing anything crazy.
The closest I've been stuck on a ride for that long is probably Pirates, which was at least 16 years ago, and I know this is not a ride, it's a mode of transportation, being stuck on a monorail at Disney about 20 years ago.
Have you ever fallen out of a ride, Jake?
Never have.
This was at the Coal Festival, which is in Boone County, West Virginia. One time I was getting out of the ride with my niece. The ride wasn't moving, but I tripped over the little step to get out, and so I just face planted on the piece of wood thing, the ramp to get out.
That hasn't happened to me, but when I was getting off of Guardians and Epcot for the first time, there were the stairs at the end of the ride, and it spun so much that my legs felt stiff.
Oh, gosh.
And I was trying to come down the stairs, and I almost tripped and almost fell, but luckily I made it down safely.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you made it down safely. This has nothing to do with me traveling, but this was fairly recent. My grandma was flying from Texas to come and visit us, and she was in the Charleston airport, and her shoelace got sucked up by the escalator, and so she tripped on the escalator.
Wow.
No, that's never happened to me either. But have you ever been to the Outer Banks, Jake?
What are the Outer Banks? Do you know what states it's in?
The Outer Banks is kind of a string of islands that run across North Carolina. And so if you look it up and stuff, there's been a lot of famous shipwrecks that's happened there. They actually call some of those islands shipwreck graveyards because there's all kinds of stuff. It's also where, if you're very into history, then you'll know the part of history where a colony came over here and then their leader had to go back and get supplies, and when he returned, the whole colony was just nowhere to be found, but the word Croatoan was carved on a tree. That also took place in the Outer Banks, and so you have different islands. You have Hatteras, you have Devil's Hill, and there's always... That place is really fun because some islands are only travel there by ferry, and so they run these different ferries at all different hours and stuff, and you can either drive your car on there if you want to. Some islands are actually small enough that they just have big parking lots, and once you get off the ferry, you park your car, and you either have to walk through the island or you have to get a bicycle and drive a bicycle through the island.
I've been to North Carolina, but I've never been to the Outer Banks, because now that name's starting to be familiar with me. The only places I've been in North Carolina are Greensboro and Asheville.
Asheville is also really nice. I know that's not the Outer Banks, but Asheville, the little town there, is so cute. And they're actually, I've seen where they've started finally getting to do the rebuilding process after Hurricane Helene went through there. And so hopefully in the near future, they'll be able to get back up to what they were before that hurricane came through.
And I've went to Asheville back in 2010 to see the Biltmore Estate, which is a Gilded Age estate. A little touristy. Speaking of Hurricane Helene, I remember the homecoming for 2024. All of the homecoming court, their promises was to help Appalachian State, which is in the same region as Asheville, to help people who were hit hard by Hurricane Helene. And one person who was once on the WMUL's board of directors, Waylon Smith, I remember he was on the homecoming court.
Mm-hmm. And if you remember, all of our proceeds for Car Bash that year went to App State too, to help them in the rebuild process, because they had a few things get damaged in that. And it's kind of crazy that Hurricane Helene caused as much damage as it did, because it even caused flooding in Logan, where I'm from. And so the bridge to go across the creek to get to my house, it got washed away, so it had to be fixed. And there was a lot of damage, and I think definitely Mingo County out of West Virginia kind of got hit the hardest with that. Those people didn't have clean water for the longest time, so the county set up a little water collection drop-off, and so it was really good that the community came together in those aspects.
Helene also hit my part of Florida, too, the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, and didn't you guys have another hurricane right after Helene, too?
Yes, it was Milton, and it took a direct hit in my area.
And so that was crazy that it was just bam, bam, 2 hurricanes right after another. You didn't even really have time to do cleanup from Hurricane Helene before Milton hit. So
and we also had Hurricane Debbie, which caused lots of flooding.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy that there are places that are still being affected by that. But it's also, if you've ever been to New Orleans and stuff, then you'll know that there are still places there that are impacted by Hurricane Katrina that happened back in 2005.
I've been to New Orleans twice, and I saw signs saying recovering from Katrina or beyond, and I seen stuff about Hurricane Katrina because that is a significant event in recent U.S. history.
I love New Orleans. It's probably one of my favorite places to visit. I can't lie about that. There's just a lot of stuff to do. It's a really beautiful city, and it's also very inspired by so many different cultures. You have French culture, and you have Southern culture, and you have Black culture, and it all kind of just meshes into one, and it's really beautiful. The food is great. There are tons of places to see. I love going to see the little boutiques and stuff along Bourbon Street. That's a lot of fun.
I've been to New Orleans twice, and New Orleans is not my favorite city.
That's understandable. I like it for the aspect of just getting to learn about everything, because I love history stuff. If I was not a journalist, I probably would have went into something history related. Can't lie to you, because I just love to learn about that stuff. I love going to museums and going to all of the different cultural things too. So that's why I mainly like it. But I've been to so many places that it is kind of hard to just pick a favorite. We were talking about the Outer Banks. The Outer Banks has 5 different specific lighthouses that you can visit. And as long as it's not raining, lightning, all of that good stuff, you can actually go up to the very top and visit them, and that's really cool. The last time that I went to the Outer Banks, though, we were catching the very beginning of a hurricane, and so there was a lot of different storms and stuff, and I didn't get to go up to the top of all of them that I wanted to go up to, but I still had a lot of fun. And my favorite thing about the Outer Banks is it's not super commercialized. There's still a lot of mom and pop shops, a lot of locally owned businesses, and the last time that I went, the only fast food restaurant on the Outer Banks was a Burger King.
That's great to hear, because the goal of this podcast, the Travel Podyssey, is to talk about lesser-known destinations, talking about local businesses, and steering away from the touristy places like all the commercialized fast food places. And I got that inspiration from the famous American travel writer Rick Steves, and he specializes on Europe.
I will say the Outer Banks have become more popular since the Netflix show was released, but a lot of people don't realize that, like, the show makes it look completely different than what it is. It's still very true to where they started in a way, and I really appreciate that. One of my favorite restaurants in the Outer Banks it was called, like, Jolly Pirate or something like that, but it's just this little outdoor seafood type of place. It's locally owned by a family that lives there and is on one of the smaller islands. So if you're staying anywhere like Cape Hatteras or Devil's Hill, then you have to take the ferry to get there, park your car, and walk down the street. But it's a really good place. They always have live music, or at least every time that I've been, they've had live music, so that's a really nice touch. And then once you're done, you can actually walk right down the street, like literally a 2-minute walk, and there's this really good homemade ice cream bakery type of place. Now, this one isn't just exclusive to ice cream because they've got cakes and brownies and all of that, and that, once again, is also a locally owned ice cream shop, and this little family runs it and stuff, so that's really cool. Last time I was there, actually, we had just gotten our ice cream and we went and sat at this little, like, beach table or whatever, and I left my phone laying on this rock outside. And so I didn't realize that I had left my phone until we got all the way back to the car and we were getting ready to get on the ferry. And I was like, oh, I do not have my phone. Well, it was still there, thankfully. It was still laying on that rock where I had left it, and I was able to safely retrieve my phone.
I'm glad you're lucky enough you did that, because unfortunately, some people do not have that luck.
Sometimes you can't leave anything out because somebody will take it, it'll get broke. You never know what's going to happen. But I was very, very thankful.
And I remember once in a bit in airports, you hear these announcements saying, don't leave anything unattended.
Mm-hmm. Because even in, like, some airports, you can't do that, or somebody will, like, steal your stuff, and that is not fun when you're on a trip and something gets stolen, or you leave something behind, because then you've got to track it down, or you've got to, like, Lord forbid it's your, like, debit card or something, then you've got to shut that off. So and I got very lucky. Especially
if you're on a layovers, because I know you had a lot of experience with airports, including layovers, as much I do.
Yes. 9 chances out of 10, every time I have flown, I've had some sort of layover, whether it be in Charlotte or Chicago. And I will say I'd much rather be at a layover in the Chicago O'Hare Airport, because that's a really nice one, rather than the Charlotte Airport.
I agree. I do not like the Charlotte Airport, and I'd rather have my layovers in Atlanta or Detroit, which are Delta hubs, and one of my favorite airports outside of the United States, Amsterdam, because Amsterdam's airport's very efficient. It's laid out simply, especially if you do a European flight, and I'm a Sky Team person. I haven't had a layover in Amsterdam, but if you have a layover in Amsterdam, you don't have to go through customs and recheck your bags. I've heard from my research, I saw some YouTube videos, you just passport control, security, go on to your next flight.
Yeah. And I will say, like, the layout of the airport very much depends on, like, if it's going to be a good layover or if you're going to be fighting for your life to get to your next gate.
That's one of the reasons why I do not like the Charlotte Airport, because the Charlotte Airport, there's no trains like in Atlanta. You have to walk all the way over to the E-gates. It's always crowded. It's always constructions. Whenever there's delays, it's always big ones.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. And that is also very much like Jake said, the reason why I don't like having layovers in Charlotte, because it's like rush. While O'Hara is busy and stuff like that, it is a really nice place, and there are kind of like quiet spaces in that airport that you can go and wait. And the way it's laid out, very simple to navigate if you at least know what you're looking for in an airport. That's just a really fun place. I think the worst type of like layover I've had, which wasn't even a layover. It was because they kept pushing it back and then it got canceled. I was stuck in the Cincinnati airport for 12 hours easily. My flight was supposed to leave at noon, and then it got pushed all the way back to 11:45 p.m., so we just had to wait. And then at 11:30, they canceled the flight.
That's awful. Worse than me, because beginning of the spring 26th semester at Marshall, I was stuck in Charlotte for 9 hours because when I was landing from the Sarasota Bradenton Airport to Charlotte, it was very windy. It was so windy that the plane was shaking, and I was scared for my life. Luckily, we landed safely, and then I noticed my flight to Huntington got delayed. Later, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all the incoming flights to Charlotte, and my flight from Huntington got canceled. Luckily, I knew what to do. I was prepared. I knew that day would be coming, so I just booked on to the next flight to Huntington, which doesn't leave until 9, and then that got pushed back until midnight, and I didn't get to the Huntington Tri-State Airport until 1 a.m., and the first board meeting of the spring 2026 semester was during my first 24 hours in Huntington in West Virginia because of that, me being stuck for 9 hours at Charlotte.
Whenever my flight kept getting pushed back in Cincinnati, I had plans the next day because granted, our flight was supposed to leave at noon because this was a direct flight. I didn't have a layover on the way to Colorado. We would have had almost a whole day before we had these plans, but we actually had reservations, myself and my friend, at this place called the Melting Pot, which if you know what those are, right?
I've been to Melting Pot. It's Florida-based.
I love that place. So we booked reservations at the one in Colorado. That's like right outside of Denver. Once our flight got canceled, we were like, whatever, we'll go back to the hotel. It's no biggie. We'll just get up, get on the next flight out of here. Well, then that flight, we get on the plane, and the captain comes over, and he's like, I have good news and I have bad news. Good news is we're leaving today. Bad news, I'm about to time out on my hours. Who's going to fly the plane? So they bring another pilot in, and he comes in, and then this new pilot gets on the speaker thing, and he's like, yeah, we're going to have to wait because something got, like, sucked up in the conveyor belt that they put your luggage on and stuff.
That's weird.
So, after like 30 to 45 minutes of them, whatever got sucked up in the thing, I low-key think it was somebody's luggage, but I can't confirm. It was not my luggage. It was not my friend's luggage, so I don't know. But we finally were able to take off, and we landed with 1 hour before our reservations. So my friend and I, we left our bags at the Denver airport to go to our reservations at the Melting Pot, and then her dad went back to the airport and picked our bags up for us.
That's very risky.
But on the bright side, in Denver, they will hold your bags for like 24 hours after your flight, just in case you missed it, you couldn't find it, because the Denver airport at the time, they were going through a lot of reconstruction in different areas of the airport. So it wasn't as easy to like navigate your way through the airport, and it took a little bit longer. They also only had like 2 lines of TSA open to go through checks, so lines were crazy when you first got in, and then they only had 2 bag terminal things open at the time because once again it was under repairs and all of that good stuff. So I'm thankful they did that because then it allowed us to get to our reservations on time, and we were able to go get the bags at a later time.
I'm glad you got your bags, and there's one other airport in the U.S. that is disorganized and crazy. That's New York JFK Airport, because while I was heading on my way to Paris, I landed in Terminal 4 from Tampa at JFK, and one thing why most people don't like JFK is you have to leave the security zone to take a train to the different terminals, and I flew Delta, one of my favorite airlines, by the way, into Terminal 4, and Air France, or Air France, was in Terminal 1, so I had to take the train from Terminal 4 all the way to Terminal 1, and I have to go through security again. Luckily, it wasn't too big of a line, but you definitely have to have a longer layover if you do JFK, because otherwise, the disorganization of going through security again will hold you up.
That is true. When the first time that I ever flew to New York, it was with my mom and my grandma. And we went on like a little girls' trip, and it was in December to see the Rockettes because they wanted to do that. That was really fun. However, it was a nightmare trying to get through JFK, and ever since then, I've never been there since. Every time that we would fly into New York, which was only one other time, because the other few times that I visited New York, my parents just drove. The other time that I flew, we just flew to Newark instead of JFK. And Newark is a little more easier to navigate and stuff. It's not as crazy.
I'm more of the LaGuardia guy when flying into New York because it's the closest to Manhattan, and I'm sure you said you took road trips there, including your Borough trip.
Yeah, that was supposed to be a plane ride, and then we got this big storm in of rain. It wasn't a snowstorm, but it was a rainstorm, and so flights were getting canceled and all of that. So I want to say it was the day before we were supposed to leave, or 2 days before we were supposed to leave, and he was like, okay, we're going to drive all the way up there. And honestly, it wasn't a bad trip. Like I said, I've made that trip before a few times, so I was prepared for what it was going to be like. And we were talking about earlier in this episode is we've taken RV trips. And so you get used to taking long road trips when you have an RV, because why wouldn't you use your RV?
Right. And I've been RVing for a long time, and my dad and I, we've went through big cities like Houston, Atlanta, and I remember that going through Houston was pretty scary because there were 8 to 10 lanes on I-10, and my brother told my dad, just stay in the middle lane.
Yep. And that is like probably the best thing that you can do when going through Houston, because it's crazy. It's even more crazy now since they added the expansion to the road, and they just built a new hospital in Houston, I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago. And so they obviously had to like reroute the road there, but they also made it bigger to accommodate the hospital. And so it's just kind of crazy there. And the tolls through Houston and that area are also crazy. You gotta like know different routes to take if you don't want to pay the toll fees.
Right, that's like parts like in Orlando and Miami. Those is where that pain gets into. Also, speaking of Houston, everything's bigger in Texas.
That is true. Everything is massive there. And I think one of my favorite things about Texas, and this is so random, is that city patrols and stuff like that, you know, like security guards and stuff, they still use horses to do that. They don't have cars. So it's very common to, if you go to a mall or you go to a big shopping center or anything that would need security, that you're probably going to see those security guards on horses.
I remember seeing that in Florida, too, and in London when they were doing the changing of the guard.
Mm-hmm. And so it's really cool to see that, like, they're still doing stuff like that, and that, I don't know, I just thought that was super cool. And they use those, like, the Clydesdale horses that are, like, massive. And so it's very common to see them kind of just patrolling shopping centers and malls, and that's just cool to me.
I might have to go to Texas again because do love Texas, want to go back someday, so I might have to do that. But first I have to go do my Alberta and California.
I think the biggest trip that I have planned so far, I think John and I are going to go down to Atlanta and watch some baseball over the summer.
Now You're Talking Baseball. Great song, by the way. It's featured on Rolling with the Oldies with DJ Benderson.
So that'll be fun. I don't know if we're going to fly yet or if we're just going to make a road trip out of it. I think it'll be fun. I like to watch baseball.
Where I'm from, there's this thing called spring training in Florida. It's popular in Florida and Arizona. And I'm not a baseball person, but I do remember going to 2 spring training games, which were for the Baltimore Orioles, because when I was around 10, 9, you used to do in elementary school is read a chapter book and answer some comprehension questions, and you get a free ticket to the Baltimore Orioles spring training game in Sarasota.
That's pretty cool. I don't know when exactly we're going. This is kind of a John trip. He's the big sports fanatic and stuff. We're going to Cincinnati on the 29th of March.
Love Cincinnati.
For a Reds game. So that'll be fun. It'll be, Oh gosh, we probably go to like 3 or 4 of them in Cincinnati a year.
That's me with Notre Dame football.
Just because John likes baseball, I like Cincinnati, so, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, essentially.
You're right.
You get to go, he gets to watch baseball, and I get to see the city and go do all the things that I like to do, see if there's anything new. I don't know. I like to just kind of walk around, see what's going on.
Me too.
There's a lot of, neat little restaurants, a lot of neat little shops through there, and honestly, Cincinnati's a pretty easy city to navigate. It's a big city, but very easy to navigate. If you've ever driven in, New York, then New York is a pain to drive in.
Mm-hmm.
D.C. is a little bit of a pain. That one's not too bad, but...
Paris is a pain, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. But Cincinnati, if you ever want to go to, a city and you want it to be easy, I would recommend to go there. Especially if you're in Huntington. It's not that far of a drive.
I've been to Cincinnati twice. I love Cincinnati. I nickname it Mini New York because it gives me the New York City vibes. And I do like New York, but I prefer Cincinnati because it's safer, it's cleaner, and it's more friendlier. And no trip to Cincinnati is complete without going to Jungle Gyms.
I would agree with that. When we take these trips, I try to at least make 1 trip so we could go there either before a game or after a game.
For those who don't know, Jungle Gyms is a jungle-themed grocery store known for international snacks you can't get in the U.S. They sell international snacks so people who don't have access to a passport can enjoy these snacks without leaving the country.
But no, I agree with you in the fact of if you want an experience like New York, go to Cincinnati. It's laid out so much better. Like Jake was saying, the people are nicer. And it's not as congested either. So that's always a plus.
Right, and Cincinnati has some great restaurants too. We have K-Town Pot and Barbecue, which is a Korean barbecue place in Cincinnati in the Over the Rhine district, which reminds me of Manhattan. There's the Bagelry, that's a bagel place, and in the northern suburbs of Cincinnati, there's Trophy Pizza, which is like New York-style pizza. Once again,
it
me
is very
getting
good.
New York vibes.
That pizza place is amazing.
I've heard about it because of Dave Portnoy.
Mm-hmm. I also like Columbus, too. You get hockey there. That's always fun.
I've been to Columbus once. I'm not a Columbus guy because of Ohio State, but we could save that another time.
That's probably how I feel about, Louisville, to be honest. Louisville is not my favorite city. It's kind of laid out weird.
I love Louisville.
But it's always a good time to go and explore. John has a friend that lives right outside of Louisville. It's literally like a 5-minute drive to get into the city from where his friend lives. So anytime we go visit there, we always visit his friend, and his friend will show us around different places. So that's a lot of fun. I like it for that aspect too.
I love Louisville because of the food. There's 2 great barbecue places. There's a great Neapolitan place there called Pizza Lupo. And I'm a guy who loves going to antique malls. They have Bellwood, which is Louisville's biggest antique mall. Right outside of Louisville in Indiana, there's a small little town called Corydon. They have some great antiquing. And it's also Indiana's first state capital. The whole Kentucky Golden Triangle offers some great antiquing. There's great antiquing in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, great antiquing in Louisville, and great antiquing in Lexington. And this brings us back to the beginning of the variety episode.
Yeah, and actually, during the, summer, there's a huge yard sale that goes all along, parts of Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and they have a lot of different, antique things, and I would recommend if you're into that stuff, definitely check out that, yard sale. I think it's, 100 miles long, but it's super cool. They have a lot of nice stuff. My favorite antiquing places that I have ever been is, there's this little antique shop. It's not little. It's actually, 3 stories, but it is in a very old house in Conroe, Texas, and it's not a lot of people go there because, it's outside of Houston. Nobody's really coming to Conroe unless you have a reason to be there, but that antique shop is so cool. that's set in a house. They have like paintings and old instruments and old furniture and clothes and knickknacks and stuff like that. So it's really cool to go there. That's probably the place that I always go to first when I go down to Texas.
I might have to make a trip to Conroe someday because that antiquing got me into mind.
It is a lot of fun. I will say I found some really cool stuff there. Like I have a few glass pieces because I like to collect vintage glass from there because, you know, they have like lamps and dishware and all of that stuff. There's literally like anything that you could ever imagine. It's probably in that store in some way. And the prices aren't bad, which is always a good thing.
As I told Reese in the first episode, I'm more of a browser when it comes to antiquing. The stuff I like to look at, for those who have not listened to the first episode, I like to look at maps, vintage Coke and Pepsi, Nintendo stuff, and license plates.
Yes, and they have a little bit of all of that there. They have a license plate wall. Last time I went, they had some old maps of like when Houston was first being developed and stuff. And so that was really cool to look at. They've got like old vintage sports stuff if you're into vintage sports and all of that stuff. So it's just really cool to get out and visit those sorts of places. And then right outside of Houston, it's not in Conroe, but there is kind of this little like antique district, much like Huntington has Old Central City and stuff like that. But this place is like an actual town that still looks very old, very vintage, but they've kind of capitalized on that. And they have different antique shops and family-owned restaurants there, and that place is super cool too.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that town either. And wait, there's one more thing. It's advising time. This is where the hosts and guests gives you tips and tricks on this episode's featured destination. Do you have any tips or tricks or advice you want to share?
My biggest advice would be if you want to travel somewhere, do it, especially while you're young. If you have the time and you have the money, go for it because you never know when the opportunity may arise to go and visit these places again, and just have fun with it. You know, be safe, take all of your precautions, make sure you're making your flights if you're flying, make sure your car is good if you're driving. But overall, just take the opportunity and go explore because there are a lot of cool places, not only in the U.S., but in the world.
Emma is right because I'm getting ready to graduate undergrad from Marshall, and I've been to 9 countries, including the United States, because this episode, once again, is the variety episode. We talked a little bit about Europe, a little bit about Cincinnati and Texas and theme parks. This is being aired at a college radio station, and it's nice to have that advice coming from Emma, too.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on today, Jake.
You're welcome. And before we go, can you tell where you can be found?
You can find me on pretty much all social medias at Emma Johnson. I have posted pictures from my trips on Instagram, on Facebook. I don't know. I just love to get out and travel. You meet new people. So,
what about the WMUL stuff?
For WMUL, like I said earlier, I'm the news director for MUL. So if you want to get in contact with me, my email is on the WMUL website, but you can also see what all I'm doing on our Instagram and Facebook. I have a show called Huntington Unscripted. The week of this recording, I'm actually airing a program with the Marshall Hockey Club that's newly founded. But all of my previous episodes of Huntington Unscripted are on SoundCloud. I have a weekly wrestling show called Rope Break. That's Tuesdays from 4 to 5. So if you like wrestling, you can check that out too. A lot of these different cities is where I've traveled to see wrestling events too. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. I'm also on news once a week, twice a week. It really just depends on where I need to fill in. And news runs every Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 5:30. Unless Marshall doesn't have school, then we don't have news unless we have enough students who want to come in on their day off and do it. You can also catch me on the FM 88 Sports Network occasionally, whether it be producing, live tweeting, putting a package together, and you can catch me on my DJ program, which is called Rooted Noise. That airs every Thursday from 6 to 7. And Rooted Noise isn't your average DJ shift. I bring in different guests each week. I don't think I'll have a guest the week of this recording, but that's okay. The primary goal of this show is to highlight local artists. Maybe find a new local artist that you like. That show is a good show to listen to.
A competitor to Rockin' the Herd.
Little bit. I will say the biggest difference in my show in comparison to like Rocking the Herd is I've kind of made it like a promotional outlet in a way, not like you have to go do this, but just a way to highlight, here's what's going on at The Loud, which is a local music venue here in Huntington. I've also had the Huntington Music Collective in to highlight their, you're going to have to forgive me because this isn't necessarily the type of music I listen to, but I think it is really cool. It's called like the Punk Festival or something like that. It's happening at the Marshall Health Arena sometime in April or May, and so they highlighted that and the different artists they're bringing in. But it's a lot of fun. Some episodes, it's just me and John or someone else from the station playing some of our favorites from like Tyler Childers and Sierra Farrell and some hits of people that you know. Sometimes it really is highlighting like the small local artists like we have on Classroom Concerts. The next episode that I will have out with a guest is with Karen Combs from the Huntington Blues Society.
I've heard of her.
Love Karen. She's doing a lot of work for this Women's History Month thing over in Ashland, and there's going to be like artists and musicians and different types of vendors, and so she's going to come in and do an episode with me on the musicians that are coming to that too.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, and it'll be on SoundCloud too.
Yes, this show will be on SoundCloud, and actually, I think you're the first female guest on the show.
Yay! And we have Spotify too now, Jake, so people can find us on Spotify too, which is just WMUL-FM, same as SoundCloud. And pretty much if you've missed any of our programming, whether it be sports, news, any of the shows that I'm on, any of the shows that Jake is on, Ben Anderson is on, Nolan Duncan, those can all be found on Spotify and SoundCloud too.
And before we wrap up, Rope Break is how I've met Kyle Fletcher.
Yeah, the Australian proto-star. He's pretty cool.
And Classroom Concerts, I helped that a lot because it's my last semester here. Want to get some experience too. And unfortunately, we are running out of time here on the Travel Podyssey. So I'd like to say thank you for joining on today, Emma.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Jake.
Now we're getting into the points that if you enjoyed this show and want to listen to it again, you can listen to it on WMUL-FM SoundCloud and Spotify. This podcast is also available on YouTube, and there's other shows on our SoundCloud like Rockin' the Herd, Rollin' with the Oldies with DJ Benderson, and more as Emma and I talked about. As this episode was the variety episode, the next episode will focus on a region, but you're gonna find out next on the Travel Podyssey.